Sup dogs, TheOdie here, and welcome to the tutorial or guide to creating character sprites. In one of my devlogs to the haunting of the Chea-Wilson family, one of you guys wrote in the comments asking me to create this tutorial, and I did feel a little bit hesitant at first because I consider myself a game dev first and pixel artist last, or well, musician last, pixel artist second. But what I can say is that when I jumped into game development, I knew absolutely nothing about pixel art, and I had no idea where to start. And when I watched all these tutorials, pretty much it was all about vibes and feeling it out, seeing what looks good. And it's really weird because as a game dev first, I'm used to having rules and going through like textbook versions and shortcut versions, but art is very different and it's intimidating. But worry not, I am pretty sure that this guide will help you accelerate and reach that level of confidence, which is ultimately the goal when it comes to creating pixel art. Now, there are a couple of things we do have to talk about first, and some things I will not cover in this tutorial or guide, but it is good to know about for once you reach that certain point in your career as a game dev or a pixel artist, that you start considering those things. So first of all, you gotta know your sprite size. And when I say sprite size, I mean how tall is your character? Is he just gonna be a 1x1? Is it like 1.5 by 1? All of this matters because your sprite, your character sprite, kind of creates the foundation for everything else in the background. So it will define how tall doors are, it will define how tall trees are, houses, so on and so forth. But remember, everything is subjective, and as long as you have a whole theme to your game and it makes sense in the story that you are telling or what you are portraying, then it's actually okay to have the size vary, whether it's small trees, tall characters, or tall characters in tall trees. But in my opinion, since you are new, I think I would just rather stick to the tall characters equals tall trees, small sprites equals small trees. And then once you get more experience, then start experimenting. The next thing I want to talk about is color palettes. And we're not going to dive into color palettes in this tutorial. And honestly, you shouldn't dive into color palettes until perhaps your second project. And your first project, and you're going to have to admit to yourself, your first project is not going to look the best. It's going to look sloppy, and you're probably going to want to redo all of the art in pretty much a year from now. But that's okay, because everything that we do for the first time is awful. In a nutshell, a color palette will keep your art in theme so that you're not splashing too many colors where it can look muddied, and too much of it can actually look a little bit contrasting too. So just know that color palettes will exist in your future career, but for now, you can ignore it. Next up is hue shifting, and I'll dive into hue shifting as we go through this tutorial, especially when we go into shading and lighting. But again, I'll get to that when we get there. The last thing you want to know is the size. So if we hop into RPG Maker, you're going to see that in the database under System 2, you can actually change the tile size. Natively, it is 48 by 48 for MZ and also MV, but just talking about it, when I first started game development, I did not have this ability to change it. And what we had to use were plugins, and I wasn't really interested in using plugins to change the tile size just to work with what I got to work. And then for other versions of RPG Maker, I'm pretty sure you have to use scripts to change that. So for the most part, just stick with what the engine is natively. So in our case with MZ, 48 by 48. But do know that the smaller in pixel size or tile size that you use, the easier that it will be. It will limit you, but being limited actually makes it easier and easier to learn. So I'm actually going to be using 24 by 24, but what I'm going to do is keep the tile size in 48 by 48. And the reason for this is because all of the RTP assets are in 48 by 48. So as you start to develop and you want to use both the RTP asset and your own art, this way they won't fight or conflict. But we will be designing in 24 by 24. I know that's confusing, but you guys gonna see that there's something very neat in the power of scaling up. So I highly recommend you guys use an app called Sprite. It does cost a bit of money, but honestly, it's for what you're going to do. It's gonna be very, very well worth it. So to create our canvas, we're gonna think about our tile size, which is 48 by 48. But what I'm going to be working in is in 24 by 24. So I'm gonna divide this by 2. And also for the height by 2. Or you could just type in 24 by 24. Next up, the sprite sheet. And by the way, if you need to learn more about that sprite sheet, you can watch this video here. It's rather old, but it's surprisingly still very, very much true to this day. Anyway, you're going to want it to be 3 wide and then 4 high. So we can actually just multiply these. And bam, we have our canvas. This is a single sprite sheet. Next up from here, we're going to need to display some grids just to make it a little bit easier in our life. So we're going to change the width to 24 and the height by 24. So now we're working on the 24 by 24 tile size. So very quickly, I just created this little doodle of a dude, and it's just to show you how we're going to scale up. So back in RPG Maker, I saved it into the game folder, of course. And I'm just going to look for him. I call him Doodle Dude. Look how tiny he is. So the money sign just says that this is a single character sheet. And that's all we're going to be importing into the engine. And you're going to see that it's very tiny. And that's because it is a 24 by 24 sprite sheet. So very, very small little dude. Very, very tiny in comparison to you. Now I'm going to show you what scaling up does. So if we go into edit, sprite size, and we multiply both by 2, because it is in lock ratio, what it does to one will automatically do to the other. Hit OK, and I'm going to just save it. So every single pixel has now been multiplied by 2, and look, now he's more accurate to scale. That's all you gotta do. Work in 25 by 24, and then the engine will mathematically pixel perfect scale everything by 2. So a 1 by 1 turns into a 2 by 2. Alright, so with that said, we're going to scale this thing back down to a 24 by 24 square. And now you're probably thinking to yourself, what if I want to make my little dude 2 tiles high, 2 tiles tall, as opposed to a single tile tall? Well, that's when we go into the canvas size and we can actually multiply the height by 2. Then we might as well also drag this to the bottom, and this is what it will look like. So every square is 24 by 24, but if you can't see it in a 2 by 1 setting, then we can actually just go to the grid and multiply that one by 2. So now it looks like what you would see in RPG Maker. Boom. Okay, so I know a lot of this was really fast and probably a little bit confusing, so I re-emphasize, please watch this video. It talks about the character sprite sheets in very heavy detail, to the point that you'll know things that you probably don't even need to know, but it's good to know because you will run into those issues in the future as you do this, as you create your own artwork. Alright, so now jumping into the meats and potatoes of this tutorial, we're finally going to create our little guy. And the step 1 process is that, honestly, I do like looking at a 24 by 24, so I apologize for those who finds this a little bit complicating. But we will be working with roughly 1 1/4 height to 1 1/2 height. You're going to see a lot of empty headspace, and that's alright. I'm actually going to be developing in the style of Caster's Trap, so this is what it looks like. And the reason for it is because it's fairly accurate to that of the RTP asset, so this will allow you to use your own assets as well as the RTP asset. Alright, so with that said, let's jump into it. And the first thing we're going to do is the outline. The second thing we're going to do is the basic colors, detail, then shading. and then we'll be done. So first off, with the outline, and I like to start by using the square fill ellipse tool just to get an idea of what the head shape will look like. If you hold shift, it'll create a perfect circle, even though your mouse definitely is not moving in a perfect circle. If you hold control, it will create it from the center. If you hold both, then it will create a perfect circle from the center. And if you happen to have done something you didn't like, you can always hit Control Z to undo. So I'm gonna start from the center, hold Control, Shift, and yeah, that's a pretty decent head size. And then I'm gonna just get the outline of this dude. If we go into the pen tool, or the shortcut is B, we can start drawing it out. If you want symmetry, although in my opinion you don't really need it, but if you want symmetry just to make your style a little bit faster, that's what this button is, and you just gotta drag it to the dead center. And then what you do to one side will also be made to the other side. Now again, you don't have to be perfect with this, because as we dive into it, we're actually going to be chiseling at the pixels or the sprite little by little until it gets to the point that we like it. Now that I got the overall shape, I do want to take out the symmetry and drop the head down a little bit lower. There we go. Now it looks more similar to an RTP asset. Alright, so next up is the skin color. In general, you do want to work from red to yellow. Usually somewhere in the dark red or brownish area is where you want to be. If you want them to be light skinned, and then if you want them to be dark skinned. So that's kind of your range. Usually you don't go from this side to this side because they'll look either too orange, and I'll go to my paint bucket, or too gray, and well, they're neither a zombie nor are they an orange. So you generally want to drag it this way, and this is actually accurate to what's known as hue shifting, but I'll talk about hue shifting a little bit more once we get into shading. So I am going to try and create myself. So I do tend to be of the lighter complexion. I do tend to be a little bit on the redder side or pinkish side, and I do have a little bit of yellow. I'm just a hoopla of different things. Doesn't have to be too accurate, but once you're happy, then you can stick with it. And then I'm also going to use the paint bucket to color in the whole thing. And then if I want an outline, I'll just have to trace over it. And I forgot to talk about outlines during the intro portion, but for outlines, in general, you only want outlines if you want your artwork to look a little bit standoutish, or in some cases, a little bit cartoonish. It kind of follows the Earthbound series. So if you like the style of Earthbound and that's what you're aiming for, then yeah, try the outline. If it's not, then you could skip it. So the one thing I like to work on first is the head. There are a couple of different ways you can do eyes. You could do a single dot. You could do the line. You could do a 2x2. So again, it's kind of what you want to go for. I think in RPG Maker, a lot of them tends to be borderline on the 2x2. And then we do want some whites in our eyes. Don't have to pick our colors too seriously just yet, but just know that it's something we will dive into. This is a huge gap in your face, so you probably want to squeeze it in. But of course, we are working with both chibis and pixel art, so you can get creative. Just remember that you do have ears. And if you hold Alt, you'll go into your picker, and you can change that. So that's now my ears. But if I do want my head to be really square, I can add it from here. But of course, just boom. I think that looks a little bit better. And I can also squeeze the head in a little bit. I just press E for the eraser tool. By the way, I'm going to do all these shortcuts, but I think it's pretty obvious when you see them and what I do. Number one thing when working with any project is learn your shortcuts, because they just make things so much faster and so much easier. Alright, so now that I got my eyes in, you can have a mouth. because they are tiny, you don't need a mouth, in my opinion. But of course, that is up to you. The important thing here that I think gives off a lot of character with these character sprites is the hair. And if you're doing hair for the first time, don't just assume that this is the top of the head. Hair actually has volume. So it is okay to increase the height of it just to add hair. Now, with that said, I am trying to create myself, and I kind of have this like mid-split going on. So I'm going to try and do the same thing here. Bloop, 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 bloop. And I do use black as my foundation. As my general outline. And then I'll create it more seriously. Or I'll change the color once we get into it. And I do want to increase the height a little bit of the hair. So I am just adding volume. But it will look sloppy and it will look messy like it does for me. But again, I'm going to chisel it. So once I got there, I think I'm bringing myself closer to gray. Oopsies. Alright. And now I'm going to just square it out a little bit, make it look a little bit more even. Clear these portions up a bit. Add a little bit more color to the sides. There we go. Now it looks more like hair. A little bit like emo hair, but eh. So ta-da! It's literally just poking it one pixel at a time. Okay, I am being very distracted by the fact that I'm naked, so I'm gonna add some clothes. So right now, I'm just gonna choose a color as a placeholder. I know I want the shirt to be green, and I think I'll just throw on some dark blue jeans. I think I'm a little bit too tall. Bloop, bloop. Gonna make myself small and chibi. And then for the hair, well, that mid-split kind of goes down this way. Okay, so here's my dude. Very basic and simple looking. Okay, and now going back to the hair, I don't think I want it to just be gray and boring, so I'm gonna add a little bit of color. Thinking a very dark shade of blue. Alright, so now to do a little bit of hue shifting for adding the shadows and highlights. Pretty much, if I go darker, I want to add saturation and shift the hue towards blue or purple. If I want to go lighter, I'll get less saturated and shift the hue towards yellow. Now, how far you should jump for your hue shift? This is completely subjective for you, and it is going back to the does it look good or does it not look good? So very likely you're probably like me. My first time, I had no idea if I even know if I liked it or not. So in my opinion, adjust and then eventually just leave it. I said it at the start, but your first will be your worst. That's normal. After you do more, you become more comfortable and confident in your style. And at the end, confidence is what you're actually working towards. That's what it means to be a professional artist. It's having confidence in what you do and being able to portray it to the world. Alright, well, I do have some guidance to give you here. If you're working with a small pixel size, 24 by 24 in our case, you'll want to limit the amount of shading you do. What I mean is that we have our base color, and then we have a highlight color and a shadow color. So you can think of it as 3 shades for one color, and in my opinion, 3 shades for a 24 by 24 is good enough. Sometimes you may need to go to 4 or 5 shades by adding another layer of highlight and another layer of shadows, but I honestly wouldn't go more than 5. At this small pixel size, it kind of gets too busy and it won't look so good. So just think about 80 to 90% of your work should just remain in 3 shades for a single color. As for where you should put your shadows and highlight, honestly, look at reference photos. The light should be consistent throughout your project. If you don't know where shadows and highlights should go, then, silly as it sounds, take a photo of yourself in real life or a photo of the subject. It sounds silly, but there's honestly a reason why artists have those mannequins and wooden models. Now with that said, I'll move on to selecting the color I want for the shirt and do the similar tactic of hue shifting and using only 3 shades here. while I do this, I want to give you another guide. For the longest time, I was confused by the difference, or just in general, by hue shifting in color palettes. Hue shifting is just a technique and is mostly preferred when shading. Color palettes is a color theme, and it's a theme for your artwork. You can do hue shifting when selecting your palette, but that's not necessary. Not all the time, at least. The important thing is understanding what colors you want to use, how they balance the canvas, and what each of the colors mean for your game. It sounds very, very loose and generic and very difficult to interpret, especially for a beginner, but this is something that is learned over time through experience. This is why I say to not concern yourself with color palettes until your second project. Admittingly, there are websites where you can find already made palettes and you can use those, but honestly, you'll want to explore at least a little bit on your own first. Okay, so now that we finally have our character, our next step is to make the stepping animation. So I literally just copy and pasted this over to the next side. And for most pixel art, you really don't have to change much of what goes on up here, especially if you're just making a beginner sprite, which is very minimalistic. All you really gotta do is make them bobble, and to do that is to just bring them down one step. And then you gotta use your imagination a bit to figure out which foot is going back and which hand is going back. It's always in opposites. If it's not an opposite, then I hate to say it, but you're a little bit weird. So to do that, I'm gonna just add shading like that, and I could even minimize this arm a little bit more. So now it already looks like that's going back. And I also need to darken the skin of the hand, and I could even increase how dark it looks over there. See, a little bit of emphasis. And then for this one foot goes back, the other foot goes forward. Whichever foot is back should be higher up. And I also want to darken it. And you could do your highlights however you want. The other thing you may want to do is have the shoe pointed up. So, bam. There we go. That's what it looks like. I can also make this arm go up to make it look like it's swinging forward. And if I want to do that, I may also want to increase the size of that hand and also get rid of a little bit of that shading over there. And if I want, I could also squeeze it in, but I don't have to. And this is kind of where the whole subjective part comes in. Do you think it looks good? Do you think it looks bad? That's completely up to you. Go with what feels right. The other thing to note is that this is seen for a split second, but because it is only seen for a certain amount of frames, don't have to worry too much about it. So I just copy pasted it here, because what you can do from this point is grab the part that has changed and you can go and flip it horizontally and just move it over so that's even. So, ta-da! Now, this is him. Or, this is me. It's me! Alright, so I'm Control S to save, and I also need to scale it back up. So I'm going to multiply this by 2. Boom! Control S to save. Go back into RPG Maker. This is who he was, but if I click away and then back in, he'll auto-update. Oh, I also gotta change this, I guess. Or not. I don't know. That's weird. Well, I'll add stepping animation so we can see it. Control R, and here I am. Okay, so I will admit that arm did look weird. I am going to just increase it back. Just make sure that, remember that you are scaled up by 2. So, may be a little bit weird. There you go. Oh, this pixel's off. Boom. Haha. Then very similarly, you could just copy and paste it, or if you actually want to manually edit it to the other side, you can. Boom. But I find that to be more easier. Less stress. Let me just add another one right there and right there. Control S to save. And it should be automatically updated in here. Oh, yep, there he is. There he goes. Boop, 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 boop. Very simple stuff. Then if I want, I can also have direction fixed. And instead of stepping animation, I'll just have him walk a step forward and a step back. Step forward, step back, repeat. And I'll have frequency at the highest, and I can watch him actually move. There he goes, see? Looks pretty standard. I'm stepping, I'm dancing, I'm getting my jiggy on. I'm pretty sure that's what everyone says. Yes. Alright, so last words of advice, because I'm not going to create the entire sheet. It's pretty standard from here. I will reduce it back down so that it's easier to look at and easier to talk about. So the last things I do want to mention is that when you do the side profiles, you do want to make sure that their height stays consistent, and that for heights of certain parts of the body also stay consistent. So when he's facing left, make sure that the eyes are consistently at the same height. Same for the head. Same for where your hands are landing. Landing where your hands are. Period. And then the other thing is that once you finish this, you can copy and paste it on over here, and then literally just flip it horizontally, and they'll be facing the other direction properly. You may have to tweak a couple of things, but I'd say 90% of it will just be done with that. The last one is when you're doing the up-facing direction, you can take your down-facing direction, copy and paste it, and then just design it out of this body. Because you already have the proper height for everything. You just got to fix the hair. And I'm of course just doing this really quickly. Blah, 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 blah. See, look, his hair is already pretty much done. And then you just gotta fix the color of his shirt. It does rise higher in the back than it does in front. So, bam. And then maybe you want to adjust this so it looks different, or you could keep it looking the same. Oh, completely subjective. And then you'll have your dude. Totally distracted by that weird crack. So there you guys have it. I hope this guide helps you through your first creation of your character sprite. It will be very challenging being your first time, but hey, once you make a few of these, trust me, it just goes by so much more easier. If you enjoyed the video, a like would be very much appreciated. Check out the game I'm currently making. It's called The Haunting of the Chea-Wilson Family. Please stop by the game page, wishlist it. That would also help a huge ton. And other than that, good luck with your project. I'll see ya when I see ya. Later.